welcome to the data specification training. Today it will be, this is a code manager led event for the REC version 3. We will have myself, who I work under the communications team, and I will be looking after the kind of questions and survey responses from this. We'll have Roz and Mark, who will be leading the presentation and providing you their expert knowledge on this, and they'll be answering, I hope, the majority of the questions. And if you just go on to the next slide for me. So that's just who we are, so you know who's on the event today. And if you could just go on to the next slide again, Amy. So as I said, I'll be looking after the Q&A for today. I do ask though if you could turn all your videos and microphones off just whilst the presenters are speaking, so we don't get any background noise, and sometimes it does interfere with the bandwidth. So but the presenters, when they're speaking, they'll have their cameras on, obviously. The event is being recorded, and this will be uploaded to the portal towards the end of the week. So if there are any bits that you're not sure on or you want to share to colleagues, we'll make this available and we'll put that in the bulletin, so you can find out where that is, but that will be posted towards the end of the week. As I said, for Q&As, we will be using Slido, so you'll see that QR code and number at the bottom of your screen. So you can either scan, if you have a smartphone, you can scan that QR code and it will bring it up automatically, or if you're on a browser, you can just go onto Slido and pop that number in, and that will take you to the event. And if you go onto the Q&A there, you can answer any question, ask any question, and then there are designated Q&A sections throughout the slideshow. If you didn't want to use Slido, that's obviously fine, but when the slide will come up when it's the questions, if you could just raise your hand and then you can ask that question verbally, and then Mark and Roz will be able to help you there. And then I believe, Mark, if you've got a question.
No, I was just going to mention Slido is, if you're using Teams, Slido is now available at the top, so you don't need to use, that's the quickest way to get into it. It'll just sit at the left right side of your screen.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Mark said, if you're using the app as the main browser, you should be able to see an S on the black top of your screen, and if you click that, it should bring it up. But for those who don't have Teams as their normal like desktop app, you'll have to go in through the route that I've just mentioned there. And I think that's everything from me. So I'm going to pass over to Roz, who will go through the agenda for today and then begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie. So welcome everyone. This is the agenda for today. So we're going to start with a brief overview of what the data spec is in its current format. We're then going to talk about the impacts of V3, followed by the first of our Q&A sessions. Then we're going to talk about how you can view those impacts, the implementation timescales, and future changes to the data spec, followed by a second Q&A session. So moving to the next slide. We'll start with our REC data specification overview. So if we just move to the next one. Thank you. So on this slide here, we have the current contents of the REC data specification. Starting with the column on the left-hand side, we have our message related items. Firstly, the market message catalogue. So this is the list of messages sent between market participants. Under that, we have the data item catalogue. So these are the data items contained within the market messages, and this catalogue also includes information such as the length and valid enumerations for these data items. And under that we have the standards definition document, which sets out the rules for the data specification, and rules like it's mandatory that each data item have a meaningful name. In our middle column, we have the electricity data access matrix. So this sets out which data items from the electricity inquiry service different market participants can access. And the final grouping there at the end, effectively additional information items. So first we have guidance on the treatment of meter readings retrieved from SMETS2 gas smart metering systems. And under that, rules regarding the supply number printed on consumer bills. So those are the items currently in the REC data specification. If we move to our next slide, In terms of how you view these, they're accessed by the Energy Market Architecture Repository, which you can get to through the REC portal. On the screen here, we have a screenshot taken from the Data Specification tab on the dashboard, and the items that you can access within EMAR, so that open as pages within EMAR, are circled in yellow, and then we also have downloadable items in green. We do have machine readable and human readable versions, so we've got 2 access databases downloadable in the downloadable section, which you can use as machine readable items, and others can be looked at through a browser or Excel, but format it's downloaded in. So that's accessing the data spec. Moving on to the next slide, we're now going to talk about the impacts of REC version 3.0 on that data specification. So here's an overview of what is impacted from the market message catalogue and data item catalogue. These will be updated under REC version 3.0. We're also going to have a new data access matrix covering gas data, and the existing electricity data access matrix will also be updated. We have some new documents too in the final column, namely the CSS message business data validation rules, address population rules, and the CSS certificate profile. So for the next few slides, we're going to drill down into all of these items in detail. So let's move on to that next slide. So I'm going to start with the message and data item catalogue impacts. So firstly, REC version 3.0 is introducing 51 new market messages, which will be sent over a new transfer mechanism, the Central Switching Service Application Programming Interface, or CSS API. A sample of these is shown on the slide here. So within the data specification, the list of all the market messages, you can identify these new CSS message by their reference number. So they'll have a REC market message number that begins MM90. We also have the local catalogue reference number. For our existing flows, this is the reference that existed prior to the REC. So for example, for the DTN flows, it's a D number. For the new CSS flows, these have been given a reference beginning REC M_SN_CSS. So that's how you can tell that these are the new CSS flows. Moving to the next slide. So what messages to send and who to send to is detailed in the REC schedules. For example, the new address management schedule, registration services schedule, or RMP lifecycle schedule. You're most likely familiar with this process table format that we already have in the REC. On screen, we have an example of one of the v3.0 process tables. This sets out the triggers for an activity and the associated actions to take. So what you have is you have your when column, that's the trigger of an activity. You've got the action you should take. You've got the from and to, so this is the source and target of messages. And you've got the means. So in here you can see it's always CSS API for this particular one. And then you have your interface, which lists the message that should be used. And then you can look that message up in the data catalogue. Here we have an example message. In this particular example, we've got 2 scenario variants, the first for electricity and then the second for gas. So that's the new CSS market messages. Then moving on to our next slide. So we're going to look at the consequential DTN impacts next. So we have the 51 new CSS messages, which are effectively replacing the registration related flows currently sent over the DTN. So this slide here sets out the consequential DTC impacts. I'm not going to read out every individual flow, but essentially items that are no longer needed are being removed. So we're having 25 DTC messages removed. There'll be 1 data item that'll be amended, 2 DTC messages that will be amended, and 7 data items to be deleted. I'll just pause there so you can have a look at those lists. I won't read them out.
Ross, sorry, just whilst I just got one question in which I think links a bit to what you're talking about now. If that's okay, or would you rather wait to the Q&A session?
Oh, I see that. Is this we are a non-domestic supplier? What's the easiest way to view the changes that impact us?
Yes, that's the one. Thank you.
So I've got a slide coming up that lists the count of messages by impacted market participant. I'm going to look to Mark for this one as well, but I think we could also publish the underlying data behind that. And I'm going to talk about where you can see the list of impacts on the EMAR later. Mark, is there anything you'd add to that one?
Yeah, I think when it depends whether this question is around the CSS changes. I would hope that suppliers have been engaged in the programme and therefore would understand that the processes and messages, and I've had indeed tested those, that they're required. When it comes to the DTC messages that are being deleted or amended, probably it's looking at those tables you referenced, Ros, and yeah, we probably can publish a bit more information around that, but if we look at that first and see if that answers the question, that might be an appropriate way forward. That's okay.
Okay, I hope that answers questions, but if not, keep asking and we can drill down further.
For sure.
So if we move into the next slide. So here we go. Here we have the impacted parties. So this first one lists the DTC consequential impacted changes. So you can see the to and from the senders and the receivers and the count of deleted messages at the top, then amended messages below that. So in terms of those impacted, we have MPAS, suppliers, DCC, HHDAs, HHDCs and MEMS. So those are the senders and receivers of the impacted messages. We've basically identified this information by taking the already published information in EMAR and summing it up to get the count there. So it's relatively easy to do, but we can share this further as well. If we scroll to the next slide, here we have the new CSS API messages and the senders and receivers of those. We've got a bit more detail in this one, so you can see gaining and losing and registered senders. And we also have some new for REC version 3.0 acronyms in here. So MPAS, the Meter Point Administration Service run by DNOs, becomes the Electricity Retail Data Service, the ERDA. And the gas equivalent run by ExoServe becomes the Gas Retail Data Service, the GRDA. So we've got those new flows there. And then moving to our next slide, version numbering. So the version of the REC data catalogue that will go live on the 18th of July is version 3.0.0. We understand that some market participant systems still require a DTC version number when applying updates within their system. So the DTC catalogue is now part of the wider REC data specification. But if you do still need that number, continuing on from the DTC version numbering that existed prior to the establishment of the REC, the version of DTC that will go live on 18th of July is version 13.5. So if you're one of those parties, the number that you need is version 13.5. Now moving on to our next slide. I'm now going to look at the next column, which is the data access matrices. And so if we scroll to the next one. So firstly, the electricity data access matrix. So this is an existing REC data specification document. It details which data items held by the Electricity Inquiry Service, different categories, can access. We have published a version 3.0 data access matrix, which contains only the new switching data items. So this must be read in conjunction with the existing data access matrix for coverage of all data available via the ESS post CSS go live. REC change proposal CR22, which is called amendments to the REC data access matrix, has been raised to enhance clarity around the data items that should be accessible by the ESS user category, because we've had feedback about how the data access matrix is currently presented. So that's looking to address that feedback, but also as part of that CP, it will merge in the existing and V3 data access matrices. So this will be something that's implemented after V3 go live. An implementation date is yet to be confirmed for that one. But essentially, you just need to take the existing data access matrix and the V3 data access matrix to get that complete view. We then have the gas data access matrix. So this is new to REC. It's a refreshed version of the data permissions matrix owned by ExoServe. There is the addition of the switching data, but everything else is like for like in terms of what could be accessed under the ExoServe data permissions matrix. So just to be clear, for both gas and electricity data access matrices, there is no loss of access to data under the V3 access matrices, just the addition of the new switching items. If we move to the next slide, I'll show you what the new format matrices look like. So both the layout of the gas and electricity data access matrices has been enhanced based on feedback received. You can access data in the ESS and GSS through portfolio view, where access is only provided for metering points the organisation is responsible for. Then there's the community view, where metering points outside of the organisation's portfolio can be accessed with appropriate consent. So within the matrix that are now published on the EMAR, you've got a tab that shows the data items and the market participants, and another that has data conditions. So in the screenshot on the slide here, which is from the V3 EES data access matrix, this is telling us that suppliers can access the REL address under data condition 01, and third-party intermediaries can access the same information under data condition 02, and both have community view access, and no other market participants listed in this example can access the REL data. And then underneath that, you can see the data condition 02 there, which says that to access this data item, the TPI must agree to the terms and conditions at logon and have appropriate customer consent. So that's how to read the new format data access matrix. And if we move on to the next slide, the final column here is the supporting documents. So I'm now going to hand over to Mark to give you more information on these.
Thanks, Ros. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the first one I was going to talk about is the CSS message business data validation rules, which is a bit of a mouthful. I think that the best way to try and explain this is actually do a little bit of walkthrough of the spreadsheet itself. So may I just share my screen, please? Just show you. Yes. So let me know when you can see my screen. Has that appeared? Great, thank you. So this is available through the REC dashboard on the data specification tab. So at the bottom of that, on the left-hand side, you'll note there's some documents which are related to REC version 3, and this is one of them. So this is business data validation rules. This is the final approved version for go live. Any changes post go live will be reflected in here. So whilst we have reflected all of the message structures, so for example, these data elements here within a data specification in a uniform way with all the other catalogues that we have subsumed, what this also shows you is a bit more information. So we do show you the route and method. We will be showing you the response codes, but if you scroll down here, there are two, sorry, over scrolling there, getting excited. There are two different, can't control this. There are two different types of validation rules, which I think will be very interesting to you when you are building your systems. So the first one is the message schema checks. So this tells you that of those data items provided, which ones are mandatory. Now you can tell that because the mandatory ones are emboldened and they have an asterisk, but it gives you more information. There must only be one specified. And if we scroll down a little bit further, some business rule checks also around those data items you provided. So for example, the status from date for the registered meter point must be in the past. Yes. And an NPN that's provided on a create registered meter point request, which message we're talking about here, that must be unique and must not already exist within CSS. So this is a very useful piece of collateral when you're building your systems. So yeah, well worth being aware of. I'm just going to show you where that sits on the on the dashboard, just in case you want to go away and have a look at that. So on the dashboard data specification, it's down here within the business data validation rules. And just while I'm here, just picking up on the question earlier about how to understand what messages have changed, we presented a pre-release of the DTC data spec here, which contains those consequential changes. So if you were to compare that with the previous version, this is a live version 2.2.2, then you can see specifically those messages which Ros highlighted earlier have been removed, and you can look at the changes to the enumerations and so forth. So I just thought it was worth calling out that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing for now. If you can go back to the slides. Okay, and if we can move on to the next slide, please. And the next piece of collateral, which is also in the same place, is just about the address population rules. So this is basically just defining those rules which should be adhered to when populating any addresses within market messages as you create them. So I won't sort of read through there. You might be familiar with some of these already, but it was just to call out that those were carried forward into REC version 3. And when you're building your messages within your systems, it's well worth having a look at those to make sure that they can be created effectively and of course received and consumed effectively. Thank you for that. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think the last one we were going to mention is just the CSS certificate profile. So again, this is in spreadsheet format and again is available on the dashboard. This literally contains some technical information that's required in order to create the request for a certificate. So your IT teams will require that information in order to request and install the certificates. And again, this is under change control. So if you're implementing new systems or, as might be the case, you want to connect to a test environment or a simulator in the future, then this is the information that you will need in order to make those connections. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, that takes us to the Q&A. I'll hand back.
Thank you, Mark. So yeah, this is the first of the 2 Q&A sessions. So if anybody does have any questions, either raise your hand and then obviously you can ask your question verbally, or use Slido, which is shown on the screen. Currently there are no questions, so I'll just see if anybody, give you a couple of minutes to see if anything does come in. But please feel free to raise your hand if you did want to ask a question. I'm going to suggest moving on just because we haven't got any. There is another Q&A session further on in the slide deck, so feel free to ask any questions that you have then as well. And I'll hand back to Ros.
Thank you, Mila. So we're going to talk about viewing the impacts next. Mark's already touched on that. If we just move to the next slide. So if you want to download any of the files for the V3 pre-release, you can do so on the data specification tab of the EMAR dashboard. And I've done a little zoomed in bit there so you can see the list of items there. So we've got the new gas data access matrix, the updated electricity data access matrix, the 3 documents Mark talked through. We've got the legacy DTC message impacts, and we've got the data specification in a number of formats. So we've got the access format, which is machine readable. So if you want to implement the changes to V3 in a machine readable way, you can use that. And we've also got a human readable HTML format version there. And then the DTC only data specification. So it doesn't have the full set of REC messages, just the DTC ones in that top one. So that's how to view the impacts. If we move next to the implementation timescales. So in terms of when the changes will take effect for version 3, the switching programme has published a transition runbook that sets out the dates for when the transition will occur. And this is on the left-hand side of the screen. So the 4th of July is the last date on which suppliers can enter a new change of supply registration request in the existing systems, and this is for a switch effective date up to and including go live. And this is described as T1 in the transition runbook. On the 13th of July 2022, so T2, this is the last date on which a switch can be cancelled, withdrawn, objected to, or have objections cancelled prior to go live. And then go live is at 9 AM on the 18th of July. In terms of the associated timescales from a market message perspective, these are on the right of the screen. So from T+1, so from 14th of July, any registration files sent from suppliers to MPAS will not be processed by MPAS. However, they may still be acknowledged by the DTS as delivered. At 10 PM on the 17th of July, the CSS consequential changes to the DTS messages will be enabled on the DTS. So from this point, it will only be possible to send DTS messages that align with the new V3 data specification. And then from 9 AM on the 18th of July, CSS go live and the CSS messages can be sent via the CSS API. So that's a bit around the go live times. I can see we have a question there. I'll answer it before we move on. By T2, it's not a question, sorry, it's piece of information. So T2 is when the initial registration requests for electric stop as well. Yeah, thank you for that one as well, thank you. And then we have our next slide. And we're going to talk about future changes to the data specification. I'll hand over to Mark for this one.
Thanks, Ross. Can we move to the next slide, please? So we've just called out a couple of key things here, and I will mention a couple of other things that we're looking at as well. But the data specification, you know, as you would expect, we're going to continue to develop that. So some of you may remember, so when we went live in September last year, it was quite clear quite quickly that the data specification in the format it was released did need some changes. So we engaged with interested parties as soon as we were able, listened to that feedback, and we were able to provide more formats and a more easily readable human version as well, and we continue to work on that. So more details will come available as we move through the year. Obviously, there's been a big focus on CSS and incorporating those into the existing data specification. Other things that we're doing, just to call out a couple. So we need to consider the allocation of data master. So we're conscious that within the version 3 legal text, there are references to data master. And that information actually wasn't added within the data specification version 3. So we need to analyze whether that's a useful thing to add. So who owns which data items, and how that could be taken forward, delivering value to industry or not. So we'll be looking at that very quickly. And the second thing I'll note is that we will be adding UK link files to the data specification. So we're working closely with Exaserve on that, and we expect to be able to make an announcement on that within the next few weeks. So just a couple of things there to call out, but we will continue to evolve, and we really appreciate the engagement we've had to date. I would encourage please more, so we can make sure that what we are doing meets the requirements of industry as a whole, and gives us all a better way to operate more efficiently going forward. Okay, thank you.
There are no questions. I do just want to let everybody know, obviously there's a lot of information on all these slides, so these slides will also be made available when the recording's available as well. So if there's any information that you haven't read through or don't properly understand, those slides will be made available following the event as well. So and you can as well ask any follow-up questions there. There is one question that's come through And it says you state when a supplier must stop sending DTC registration flows to MPAS, but not when MPAS will stop sending to a supplier.
So thanks for that one, Mark. So if we go back to the slide that had the implementation timescales. So what we've done is pull out some of the key points from the transition run book published by the switching programme, and then talked about how that impacts on the data flow set and the sending and receiving data flows. In terms of when the supplier must stop sending DTC registration flows to MPAS, that would be in the transition, when MPAS will stop sending to the supplier, that would be in the transition run book too. It's just not one of the bits we've pulled out for this particular slide, but I would expect if you were to look in the transition run book, it should be documented there.
Yeah, the reason for asking is that although it's normally the next working day, you do get instances where it's 2 working days or even 3 working days before you get a response. So it's a case of it's probably a key thing for people to know that at that point, don't expect to get anything. Obviously, if it's in another detailed document, that's fine. But it was just, to me, it seemed a key thing that from that point, you won't be getting any to process, and therefore effectively you can turn them off.
Yeah, I believe it'll be in Annex B of the switching programme transition run book. So yes, yeah, apologies, we don't have it in this slide. So we built in lots of time for questions, so please do ask more, or you'll have about half an hour back.
James, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll just ask a quick one. Just looking at the data access matrix spreadsheet, and all of the fields for any role other than supplier and TPI are null at the moment, or just blank. Is that because there's scope for that to change in the future?
It's just the V3 updates.
Okay.
So it doesn't have all the data items. The main items in there are the rel address items. So at the moment it is only suppliers and TPIs that would have access to that rel information.
Okay. So the other roles can access other information.
Yes.
Still.
Yes.
As well.
And then we've got CR22s going through the process now, and that's at some point in the future going to merge the existing data access matrix with the new V3 version.
Right. Okay. And where's the existing data access? Is that on the REC portal as well?
Yes, it's on the REC portal. It's on the data specification dashboard towards, I believe it's in one of the boxes towards the top of the screen on the left-hand side, if I recall correctly.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking in the wrong place. Cheers.
That's exactly right. Top left on the data.
Yes, there's absolutely no loss of data with the new data access matrix. We're just adding in the additional rel information. Excellent. Any more questions?
There's nothing coming through on Slido as if.
We got one.
Yeah, I've got another one, sorry. Not directly related to this topic, but more of a general webinar question. Do the Q&As get published on the REC portal or RECO site in document format? So I could answer that one. So there is, so from all the REC version 3 events, we are all the questions get asked, we are putting into a document that is available on the portal, and that should be in the release page, but what we can do, and I believe every event we have a wiki page, and that will link you to those Q&As. So when we publicize that we've got the slides and the recording from an event, and the link to that will take you to that event wiki page, and on that will be a link to the FAQs. So for example, for this event, this will be put into the bulletin on Friday, and that link will take you to those FAQs. But I will make sure that's clear, because I do believe that is in the release page on the portal. And I don't believe this. I don't think these go onto the RECO website. I just think it's all on the REC portal. So I hope that answers that one. We've got another question in surrounding whether there would be a follow-up session and when, surrounding, I guess, the data specification changes. I didn't know, Roz, if you had an answer to that. I do know, sorry, before we are having some drop-in sessions. and they're going to be kind of post the 18th of July, and we'll have representatives from, you know, Ros might be there, so or Mark. So if you have any sort of specific questions, you'll be able to ask those there. They haven't been publicised yet. We haven't put those on, but in the coming weeks we will put those dates in, and then you can sign up. So if you have any specific questions, it doesn't have to be to do with the data specification. It could be any of the REC version 3 changes. You'll be able to ask them there. So I hope that answers that one. And then we have another question as well. And it says, I'm still unclear on how to view the changes that impact non-domestic only. For example, the REL address changes does not impact INC customers.
I think we'll need to take that one away, because you're thinking about it. I think there's not a non-domestic indicator or domestic indicator in the message flow, so we'll take that one away. Are you able to, you're anonymous, so we can't reply to you directly, either pop your name in, or if you email inquiries at the end of the slide, we'll put the email address up, just with your name directly, and then we can get back to you with the answer to that one. Apologies that I can't answer immediately.
I think Chris Day has a question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my head around the interactions between DTC and data specification, because my understanding essentially was when the data spec went live, the DTC was essentially end dated, albeit the legacy reference items left in there. So are we now saying that the DTC is being reinstated as the DTC, separate to the data spec?
Can I take that one? Yeah, so Christopher, the DTC has been discontinued. That's absolutely correct. So one of the pieces of feedback we got when we went live was that a number of party systems relied upon importing the DTC access database as it is in its current format in order to operate. So they were unable to operate if that was taken away. Okay, so all the DTC messages have absolutely been subsumed into the data specification with those legacy references. Yeah, we are for now, and let me caveat that in a minute, but we are for now publishing a DTC equivalent access database that only contains those DTC messages. So where those change, we will make those changes in that DTC access database, but we will also make those changes in the data specification. Now, we don't necessarily want to provide the DTC access database forever, and we'll be constantly reviewing the formats that we provide and how best people can interact with them, but we certainly won't take it away without any notice and or consultation. So I'm not saying this to alarm anyone, that they need to worry and start building systems. I think certainly in the short term everyone's got enough to worry about, but I will say that, you know, we will look at that with industry, you know, at a later date. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. So there isn't a divergence of the DTC becoming its own thing and going away from the data spec. It's just a part
Absolutely.
of more a kind of terminology thing for the legacy references, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That. So legacy references won't be taken away. They will endure within. So again, people's systems rely on those. I think.
Yeah.
So we won't take those away from the data specification. They will endure, and if we are augmenting or changing messages which were heritage DTC messages, shall we say, then, you know, we will retain those references. Yeah. So if we were to create, I'll catch myself out here, but if we were to create version 3 of a D5, let's say, then it would still be called a D5 version 3 in order that people's systems could still operate and consume those messages.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Thank you. Has anybody else got anything to raise verbally? Has nothing else come through Slido yet? Just in reference to a question that was raised earlier, I'm just going to pop in the link to the FAQs from surrounding REC version 3 in the chat, and just to note that that does get updated kind of on a weekly basis after all these events. So it's kind of a live document. And I've just popped that there now. Any other questions? Otherwise, I believe that will conclude today's session. if you can go on just to the next slide, Amy. As always with the REC Code Manager events, we do seek your feedback, and on Slido as well, we do have a survey just to see how you found the session and what we could do kind of to make things better for you, and if there's any things there you didn't understand, and we can pass those on as well to Ros and Mark so they can reach out to you. But I believe that's everything. Ros and Mark, is there anything else?
No, that's everything. But can I just ask the person who raised the question on non-domestic only flows to just email that address there with their contact details so that we know who you are, and then we can get back to you with the answer to that one.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both. Yeah, we'll give you back some of your morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.